I did that. I took the cat shot that way, flipped the gear handle up, and boom, I was airborne. The flight deck's 65 feet above the water. There's something wrong here. And I looked, the friction hadn't held the power control lever forward. It had come all the way back to idle. Well, I immediately slammed that thing full forward. And meanwhile, I'm settling. I actually raised my feet off of the floor as if I could keep my feet from getting wet. But I'm getting close to the water now. There's actually a cushion of air between the water and the underside of your wing that will buy you a few extra feet before you hit the water. I probably should have ejected, which would have been hard to explain how I'd gotten in that situation.
Curious Humanography is proud to partner with Utah Honor Flight, part of the National Honor Flight Network, giving veterans the trip of a lifetime to Washington, D.C. to visit memorials built in their honor. Each flight is free for veterans and made possible by generous donors. To learn more or support their mission, visit utahhonorflight.org and find your local Honor Flight hub at www.honorflight.org. Also, if you'd like to see more stories like this, please support us by subscribing to our channel, liking, commenting on the video, and sharing it with your friends. Your support helps us continue to bring stories that deserve to be heard. Thank you for watching, and now back to our show. Thanks for coming today, and let's start with your name and where you grew up and a little of your background.
Sure. Fred Lewis, born in Idaho Falls. After World War II, Dad collected us, and we moved down to Southern California. So I was raised most of the time in San Fernando Valley, which is where North Hollywood is. Universal Studios, probably people know that. And went through high school there, then off to BYU for college. I showed up there in '62. And because of my age, I was born in November, but my parents put me into school probably a year before they should have. So I was able to get 2 years at BYU in before I took off to be a missionary in Mexico, and then back. And in those 60s, in those days, Vietnam War was going on, and people that had deferments knew that once they finished up their schooling, they were going to end up in the military. That was just the nature of things. So probably in '67, the recruiters, at the end of the year, you had your IBM recruiters and everybody else showing up, but you also had the Navy, the Marine Corps, the Air Force, the Army, all showed up. And even BYU had an Army and an Air Force ROTC, but I was never part of that. So in '67, I committed with the Navy. I loved flying. I already had my private license. And I thought, gee, doing that off an aircraft carrier sounds like a lot of fun. Southern California, went to the beach a lot. So I figured this is the best of both worlds, I thought, and signed up. And then, of course, they don't take you until you graduate, because to be a pilot, you have to have a degree, a college degree. So I did that and finished my last final on a Friday. This is back before BYU does it like it does now. You go home for Christmas, you finished a semester. Then you went home for Christmas, you came back in the month of January, you finished up that semester, and then you moved on to the second semester in February. So the last day of January, I finished my last final, and it looked good that I was going to graduate. So I drove home to Southern California, said goodbye to my folks, got on an airplane, flew to Pensacola, Florida, and joined the Naval Aviation Officer Candidate School there in the first week in February, which was funny. It turned out there were 3 other guys on the airplane with me that were going the same place I was. So we shared a cab from there, from the airport out to the Naval Air Station, Pensacola. And this is about 10 o'clock in the morning, and we told him where we wanted to go. The taxi driver knew well the routine. And we said, we want to go to Indoctrination Battalion on the base. And he said, it's 10 o'clock. Why do you want to do that now? I said, well, we're here. Let's go. And he says, you know, there's a park over here. You could just hang around there and then show up at 12. But we were stupid. I think we thought we got extra points if you showed up early, but it was an extra 2 hours in hell is what it turned out to be, because we showed up early enough to where we're the only ones they could focus on, and they were yelling and screaming at us like boot camp is. And we were thinking about that cab driver. And we'd all decided we'd, keep track of each other in there. But the first thing they do with you when you get in is take you to the barber shop. And now everybody looks the same. One of these guys was a real long-haired character. And pretty soon I didn't know him from anybody else because we had no hair. And that began what for me was a very exciting 9 years. I was from February of 1969 until March of 1978. I was in the military, in the Navy. And it was an interesting life.
Tell me when, because you were a little different than a lot of recruits because you'd already flown.
Yes.
Tell me about wanting to be a pilot and how that started, even before you got into the Navy.
Well, yeah, my first year at BYU, on the radio one day, they said, come on down to Provo Municipal Airport and take a free flying lesson. And I said, yeah, that sounds fun. So I went down there. And this is back when flight time was $10 an hour. Now picture that today. But and if you took that and then you wanted to go on to get your private license, they would charge you for that, $10. That included the instructor pilot, who was a former Navy pilot in World War II and a mechanic. So when he wasn't flying, he was in the hangar doing stuff. But when I'd show up, he'd take me flying.
What was the plane you flew?
We flew, it was a Cessna high wing is what it was. So that's what I learned to fly in. And I'd go out there, and after 8 hours, they said, okay, you're ready to solo. And that's one of the most interesting experiences in the world when the right seat now is empty. You're on your own in that thing, and off you go. And if you return and don't break the airplane, then you passed. And that's as far as I got the first year. But when I came home before my second year at BYU, I asked Dad if he'd go halves with me on getting my private license, which is 40 hours, which is $400, but I already had 8 hours of those done. So he said, sure. So by the time I was done halfway through my second year, at BYU, I had my private license. And that was different now. Now I could take people flying. So I'd collect guys at the dorm who wanted to go flying and take them up. And we were so dangerous. It was just stupid to do that, but survived it okay. So when the recruiter showed up on campus, I had decided that I would go with the Navy, naval aviation, and looking forward to flying off an aircraft carrier, which at the time I didn't realize how rigorous the training was and how many people washed out. So there was no guarantee when I signed up with those Navy guys on campus at BYU in 1967 that I'd end up a pilot in the Navy.
What did your dad think of you signing up for the Navy?
He was okay with it. In fact, I'm sure Dad's attitude was, he'd served in World War II in combat, which I never did in the Navy. The ceasefire was in effect in Vietnam by the time I got there. But Dad, he'd been raised on a farm, and you were expected to do things there, and, was driving when he was age 12. And he was just, the quicker you accelerate this kind of experience in life where you had to do things that were meaningful and challenging, he was all for it. Mom didn't think the same way. Mothers always worry about the boys. No, don't do that.
Well, okay, Tim, now let's go to basic training. What was that like? Tell me about that.
Basic training was, I hadn't been in the military yet, so I still needed that 3 months worth of basic training. And being literally thrown through the door at indoctrination battalion when we showed up early that day. And there was no explanation ever given as to what was going on. You just had to learn from context what was happening. For example, and you said, "Are you eyeballing me, mister?" And I said, "What's that?" And then they'd yell out, "What's the first word out of your mouth?" And of course it's sir. So sir, no sir, yes sir, no sir. So you sort of figured this out as the screaming went on. And And the name, the description, or the order to brace the bulkhead really threw me, because what's a bulkhead? Well, in the Navy, that's a wall. So, okay, brace the bulkhead. That meant you're up straight against the wall. Your head, your butt, and the heels of your boots are touching the wall. So it took a little while to figure that one out. And but this was we called it Splinterville there in Pensacola. The places where your dorms were, where you slept, and where the classes were that you took. And anytime an officer or your drill instructor, and these were Marine Corps drill instructors, Rufus J. Washington was my. This has been 50.
That's a great name.
Yeah, 50 or 60 years ago, but I remember that, including his middle name. When he came in, he was like an officer, so you brace the bulkhead, and you ram your head against these walls, and they're all sheetrock, and you could look like down any passageway in that building, and you could see the indentations of heads there. You knew the tallest guy from the shortest guy just by these indentations. And several times during that 3-month period, they'd have the guys come in with their sheetrock mud and flatten the wall out again. And it just made it harder for head now, because now you're going through plaster and sheetrock mud. But the last week of battalion work before you got commissioned, you were the officer candidates that were training the next group in there. So you were the ones yelling, "Brace the bulkhead. Are you eyeballing me, mister? What's the first word out of your mouth?" and this is from, here I am. By this time, I'm 22 or 23. I've been to university. I've served as a missionary in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And, I was, some of it I thought was sort of stupid, but it's stuff you learn, because in the military, you got to respond to orders. I mean, that's just the nature of things. Especially if you're a ground pounder, you're going to go out there and sleep in the jungle, which is one of the reasons I decided to go into the Navy. I didn't want to sleep in the jungle with creepy crawlies all over the place around there. So at least I had a bed and a warm place to stay, assuming you made it back or survived. So after 3 months, we got commissioned. And I was telling you earlier that these drill instructors, at first you're convinced that they could kill you and it wouldn't affect their position in the Navy. It was, as long as it was a good cause, if he killed one of these candidates, it was all right. But after a while, you figured out, now these guys were looking out for us and trying to teach us stuff that we needed to know. And but the first guy that salutes you after you've commissioned always gets some money. So the last week we're the battalion, the drill instructor explaining to it how to do that. He says, "I'm going to be the first one to salute you, and then we'll shake hands. And in your palm of your hand, there better be something in there." So I think it was a $10 bill, back when $10 meant something. And he saluted me. I shook his hand, and his hand went straight from my hand into his pocket, and then he was ready for the next guy.
Sounds like a racket to me.
Yeah, but all permissible. Yeah, and then from there, then you started your next phase of training, which was now the Navy with Pipers and different little airplanes like that.
And where did you go for that? Were you at the same place?
Stay right there in Pensacola, Florida. They had 3 outlying bases. You'd take off from Pensacola and go out and work at this field and come back.
Did that next phase have the same kind of abuse going on, or was it a little more relaxed?
No, you're an officer now, so they treated you differently. But in aviation, and later on I got a chance to be an instructor. The instructor pilots that I never appreciated were the ones that we called the screamers. You don't learn a lot when somebody's yelling at you, especially the flight part of it. And the more complicated the airplane, he was a distraction if he was yelling at you. So I made a point never to be a screamer. But you had to put up with all sorts of different types as instructors there. And again, that's just part of life too. You got to deal with different types of people. So
did you feel at that point, because knowing how to fly that you had a leg up on other guys, or no?
No, the Navy started out with you. That didn't make any difference to them. You start from the basics. And there were several guys that I knew had flown before, and it was helpful. But after about 25 hours or so, you were all on a par. But the thing that amazed me was how few hours we had. I looked in my logbook before I came here today. I had 147 and a half hours the first time I landed on an aircraft carrier. That's not a lot of hours. I mean, and there was a lot that went into that too. And so it was very demanding. And there weren't any excuses for not doing it right. Had a lot of friends wash out rather. Well, I had some wipe out too, but washed out, and because they couldn't perform at the level that they wanted you there. And keeping in mind that landing on an aircraft carrier is no easy thing. And we took perverse delight in harassing anytime we ran into Air Force guys. This is inter-service rivalry, but they weren't real pilots. It was the Navy guys that were. And, of course, they'd badmouth you and say no. But we knew that when they were on their own, any one of those would have given anything to land on an aircraft carrier. So, but they were our brothers, so we put up with it.
Okay, so tell me, how long was that process then?
It was over a year. I want to say it was a year and a half from start to finish. And one of the things I had to do when I signed up in the Navy, when the recruiters at BYU came on campus, first off, you had to get a degree, so they knew you were coming in. They just left you alone until you got that degree. And then, forgot where I was going here. What was the question?
In the training process, were you, like when you went on those planes, were there multiple guys in an airplane, or was it just you and the instructor?
No, it was just you and the instructor. And you got to the point where you started to feel comfortable, and you could tell you were getting someplace. And then they started to train you for the actual landing on the aircraft carrier. And this is after you've dropped practice bombs, you've done air-to-air combat, which is, dogfighting, all those different things you have to learn as a pilot.
Now, have you already been assigned the A-7 at this point, or no? Or is this
no, not yet.
So what are you flying to land on the aircraft carrier?
Well, they had this little airplane called a T2, and it was a twin-engine airplane, but inline thrust. In other words, the engines went way out on the wings. They were inline.
A jet?
Yep, it was a jet. And it's a little tricky to do, and a lot of stuff to learn. And as you did it, and you got better at it, more comfortable, you're thinking, okay, I got this handled, until you go out to the ship. And then it somehow becomes different.
The first time you do it, is an instructor in there with you, or you're by yourself?
Nope.
Wow.
The T2 was a single piloted aircraft. And so they'd tell you what you needed to know and describe how it's going to go. And these guys you respect because they've been through it now. And you know that you got to listen to what they have to say, because no matter how good you think you are, you're moving into a different world, totally different environment around the aircraft carrier. Just a lot of things you're looking out for and a lot of things you have to do right. And the first time you roll into the groove, which is that space at the aft end of the aircraft carrier where you're lining up with it to make your landing, there's a thing called the optical landing system, which is on the port side of the ship. And it's a set of lights, 5 Fresnel lenses, and datum lights, green lights going horizontally like this. But you can only see one of those lights at a time, depending on whether you're high on a glide path or low. So what you try and do is find the one that's in the middle that's lined up with these green datum lights. And that means you're on the glide path that you want. And if you follow that and it's calm seas, you're going to hit the deck where you want to, so that your tail hook will engage one of the cross deck pennants, they call it, the wires that stop you and then you can land. So my first one, I rolled into the groove, and it was just too much adrenaline. They waved me off right away, so I had to go around, and LSO was saying, "Come on."
Were you too high or too low, or what was it?
It was all of the above. Too high, too high, too fast, too all sorts of. Everything was wrong. So,
Did you know that going in, or was it everything just coming at you so fast?
Yeah, it was coming at you so fast, and all the time before you've landed on a runway, and now you're landed on this thing, and even though the carrier I was eventually on, the USS Kitty Hawk, was over 1,000 feet long, this was the USS Lexington, which was 700 feet, I think it was. It was a lot shorter thing. And first time approaching that thing, you're looking at it and say, where's the rest of it? There should be more place to land here. But they're trying to get you to a spot on the deck just before the 3-wire where your tail hook will hit that as your landing gear is hitting. And when you feel the tug of the wires, then you've done the first one okay. And so you're fighting lineup. Imagine this, the aircraft carrier is going on some heading, but the angle deck is 15 degrees off of that heading. And so it seems like you're always crabbing into land. And that takes a while to adjust to, but you get the feel for it. And that first landing where the tug of the wire and you come to a stop, you're thinking, I did it. Well, you don't have time to do that because they want you out of the way. They want your hook up. They want you taxied out of the area so that the guy behind you has a clear deck to land. And they have on the deck of the aircraft carrier, they have all these red lines that mark the landing area. And they have guys standing there with pickles, a thumb-actuated button. And they're looking down at their part of it to make sure that nothing is in that area except you coming down. And now once you're on the deck, they want you out of that area right away. And they crush this button and hold it down, indicating a foul deck until you're clear. Once you're clear of these red lines, they release theirs, and there's several of these guys down there because it's not a straight line. It just covers that area there. And once they've got a green deck, they're ready for the next guy. And so they want you out of the way. And what they're doing is taxing you forward to the catapults, which is a different world as well. And on an angle deck, you've got the angle deck is where you land. And then when you get forward of the island and you're where they have the catapults, it's a different world. You got to watch those guys. We call them yellow shirts because they wear yellow shirts. If you've seen some of the Tom Cruise movies and stuff, everybody's got a different colored jersey. And the yellow shirts are the king of the flight deck. Those are the guys that, get you where they want you to be. And then you got green guys, which are maintenance guys, white guys, which are safety guys, blue guys, purple guys, fuel and tie-down chains. Everybody's got a color. And they bring you up there, and you got to watch that guy because getting onto the catapult's a little tricky. You can't be a little right or a little left. You got to be lined up right down the middle. And then they got to anchor you down to the catapult, to the shuttle, which is the one part of the catapult that's above the flight deck. And then they give you the wind-up.
Hold on. I got to stop you. So you flew from landed on the aircraft carrier. Mm-hmm. You did it the second time. You did 2 passes to land?
Yeah, they waved me off the first time, which is embarrassing because all your buddies later on, you got a bolter. That's what they call it. Well, it wasn't a bolter. I didn't get close enough to bolter, which is hitting the deck, missing a wire, and then taking off. I didn't even get to the deck. They wouldn't let me that close.
And how long before you're landing again if they wave you off?
You continue forward, and you're doing this all. You're seeing this. Nobody's giving you calls. You're looking to make sure there's nobody on the downwind leg. You make your turn, get to the downwind leg, which now gets you to a beam, a Navy term there, which means the landing area is here and it's 90 degrees off of where you are. And then you start your turn and roll into the groove, which is that last part where you're finally lined up with the angle deck. And supposedly you hit it where the ball at the optical landing system is in the green area there. and then you start yourself downhill.
And how far away from the carrier are you when you start this? When you make that turn, probably
when you make that turn,
a mile.
No, you're not a mile. You're less than a mile as you turn in. It's hard for me to think back.
And how high off the water are you? Probably.
Well, in theory, 1,100 feet. Let's see, what was that? Yeah, I think it was 1,100 feet where you'd start, and then you're coming downhill during your turn. That you're getting your line up, and if you do everything right, you look out there, you're going to see the ball. But it's a long ways off. And even if you have 20/20 vision, it's sometimes hard to tell exactly whether you're up or down or whatever it is. So,
and how fast are you moving, probably?
In that time, in the T2, I'm guessing 110 knots, 120, something there, which is, 120, 130 miles per hour. And that's not entirely true because it depends on the winds. The carrier always turns into the winds because that reduces your closure rate. Right. Whatever you can pick up with that headwind is in your favor. And so, your speed over the ground may be different just because you're trying to hit a moving object, the ship. Right. I mean, everything about this is
so
interesting.
If you're less than a mile,
and
1,100 feet, that carrier comes up fast.
Well, by the time you roll in the groove, you're less than that because you're coming downhill. Yeah. And after a while, for your airplane, you're getting used to where that looks about right.
Yeah.
Okay, but what doesn't look right is if you have high winds and your closure rate with the carrier is less. You look there and say, boy, I feel like I'm high here. And but you're not. You're where you're supposed to be. So anyhow.
And right after you land, they shoot you out again.
Yeah, right after you land, they're going to take you right up to the catapult.
Right.
And get you strapped on that thing ready to go. So anyhow, they do that. Finally, the CAT officer, the guy that's going to shoot you, he's up there and he gives you the wind-up, 2 fingers, which means, okay, go to 100% power, military power, they call it. But you got your feet on the brakes and you're strapped to the shuttle, they call it. But they're not ready to shoot you yet until you salute them. And that implies that you've looked over your instruments, everything looks right. And so you give that salute and 1 potato 2, you're airborne. I mean, you're at in the T2 it was lower, but in the A-7 that I eventually flew, you were going about 165 knots in less than 1 potato 2. We used to, for fun, to see if you're supposed to put your head back in the headrest of the airplane before catapult shot, because if not, it's going to end up back there anyway. And so, but we used to try and see if we could keep our head off the headrest. And so when they'd shoot you, you'd try and keep it off there. And I could do that unless we had a heavy load, because the heavier the load you're carrying, weapons or whatever, the more juice they got to give to the catapult. And there were sometimes there's no way you can keep it off there. You're just going to be pushed back in the seat.
Do you not pull back on the stick until you've left the deck? Or are you pulling back the minute you...
No, you don't. In fact, you catch it. I always kept my hand cupped behind the stick, which is in between your legs there. And the catapult shot will bring it back into your hand. And then you just keep what you got. And usually the math is all right. They've done this thing millions of times. You're climbing, which is another... Okay. You got to take this stuff seriously. But sometimes, after you'd been out for 2 or 3 months on the ship, you were getting bored, even though it's dangerous stuff and it was the same stuff. So somebody would say, how quickly can you get your gear up on a catapult shot? And in the A-7, you got the power control level on the left-hand side here. And then there's a T handle that can retract. You pull it up and you loop your 2 fingers that are on the control lever, power control lever, over that, so that during the catapult shot, you don't pull back that power. That's not a good thing. You want all the power you can get coming off there. But also, at some point, you got to reach up and flip the gear handle up, which if you were really good or stupid, you could do while you were on the catapult because there's a weight-on gear switch, which means you can raise the gear handle, and it's not going to raise the gear until there's weight off the gear, and then it'll come up. But none of us were willing to do that. But we were going, the next best thing was how quickly can you get the gear up after that? And everything that goes on the ship, landings and takeoffs, are all recorded on camera. And in your ready room, you can watch it. And so, and this is stuff we'd have probably been court-martialed if they knew what we were doing. But we were just a bunch of stupid JOs, junior officers, trying to, keep from getting bored. So I figured, okay, on the power control lever, there's also a friction lock that you could run forward so the power control lever isn't going to move. And what I could do was reach over the top of that and keep my hand on the gear handle during the cat shot so that as soon as I felt the tug of the cat, I could flip the handle up. I wasn't willing to do that before, even though there was a weight-on gear switch. And I knew all my buddies are back there watching as you're going off. And so I did that. I took the cat shot that way, flipped the gear handle up, and boom, I was airborne. But then there was something off, and there's something wrong here. And I looked. The friction hadn't held the power control lever forward. It had come all the way back to idle. And now, instead of hearing the engine, there wasn't, and the flight deck's 65 feet above the water. So I immediately slammed that thing full forward. But this is a turbofan engine, which is it takes a while for it to and meanwhile, I'm settling off the angle deck, and the air boss and towers, off the catapult, keep it climbing. And I wanted to say something stupid to him. Do you think I like it down here? But meanwhile, I actually raised my feet off of the floor as if I could keep my feet from getting wet. I mean, that's and I was also, and I could feel that the engine was winding up, and I was starting to feel some thrust. But I'm getting close to the water now, and there's another saying, which is a stupid saying: "Better dead than look bad." So, I probably should have ejected, which would have been hard to explain how I'd gotten in that situation. But I just wrote it out, and there's a thing called ground effect. As you finally get close to the water, there's actually a cushion of air between the water and the underside of your wing that will buy you a few extra feet, before you hit the water. And also the gear is up, so you don't have to worry about dragging that in the water. And finally, I could feel the thrust. I thought, okay, I'm going to make this. And what I'm not seeing is that afterwards they told me our green shirts on the Kitty Hawk, the guys that, our maintenance guys were watching me. And now I'm down just scooting across the top of the water with the nose up and the jet wash hitting the water behind it. Just a huge rooster tail, like I was water skiing out there.
Oh, wow.
As they were watching, they figured he's going to go in the water. And now I've pretty well got things under control where I figure, okay, I can really start to climb, which was important because during all operations on the carrier, there's a guy called the plane guard. And there's usually one aft of the ship that's supposed to be available to, a destroyer back there that can pick up a guy out of the water if he goes in that way, or if in the front of the ship, the plane guard is 1 mile ahead of the ship. And I'm looking in the windscreen, and there he is. And he's, he has some elevation to him, and I'm not above the highest part of that ship yet. So, and if you turn, you lose lift, so that's not a good idea. So I just squeaked it up and finally cleared him and got airborne and figured that was dumb. But when I got back to the ready room, all the guys in there, they were grading these things. I had all 10s on my line up there. All the guys that gave me a grade, like it was the Olympics or something. Anyhow.
Did you get to watch it? They recorded that or no?
They recorded it, but I wasn't going to have them play it back because that would have drawn attention to me. Like, what were you doing?
Can't tell you. They were like, good save, man. Is that what they were saying?
Yeah. Yeah. And they were looking for how quickly I got the gear up was really quick.
Yeah.
But whatever happened after that was all extra.
Wow.
Frosting on the cake.
Oh, my gosh.
But it was stupid. But we were all young and dumb and indestructible. We figured, hey, nothing can happen to us.
Okay, so go back to the first day on the aircraft carrier. Did you make several landings that day?
Yeah, to qualify, you had to make 4 arrested landings, which I did. Actually, you're supposed to do a touch and go, but that first thing, they wouldn't even let me do the touch and go. That's when they waved me off. But after that, then you instantly start to build some confidence after you've done it 2 or 3 or 4 times. The interesting thing, though, that morning, the Kitty Hawk, you
say the Jefferson? Is that
no, it was Lexington. The Lexington was home ported in Pensacola. And so that morning, there were 16 of us that were qualifying. 4 of us would take off from land and go land on the ship, and then hot seat, where they'd never shut the engine down. They just tie the airplane down, refuel it up to a half load or whatever they were going to do. And then you'd climb out while the engine's running and the next pilot would come in. It just saves hours of time there. But out of the 16 pilots there that day, 1 was killed. And that was interesting. We knew this was a dangerous thing, but this guy, when he came, I'm not sure yet what happened, but the general consensus was it was a cold cat shot. In other words, he hadn't flown yet. This is his first time in the airplane on the ship, and there's the what they call the pucker factor, where you just don't know what it is, and he's never done a cat shot before, so he has no idea what it's supposed to feel like. They strapped him onto the catapult, and it never got him up to flying speed. And so he didn't realize that until he got to the end of the catapult shot, because the airspeed indicator wasn't up where it should be, and so he figured, I better eject, which is what he should do. And so he did. There's a face curtain up above here that you pull down, and it comes over your face as the seat leaves the airplane. But the seats in the T2 were not what they call 0-0 seats. In the A-7, you could be on the ground, 0 airspeed, pull this, and you'd get 1 swing in the chute before you hit the ground. Well,
so the act of pulling that down activates the seat.
Yeah, it fires the rocket motor, and in the case of the A-7, they had canopy breakers on the seat, which were metal pieces that came up, and you could just go through the canopy. On the T2, it wasn't like that, so the canopy had to clear before the sequence would be completed, and you'd be going up. Well, he had, because it wasn't his fault, really. He just didn't know what it was supposed to be like. You don't know that until you've done it, so you hope the first time is correct.
Right.
And so by the time he ejected, the nose had fallen through, so rather than the seat shooting him up, it shot him forward. And the canopy of the chute, it streamed but never blossomed. He hit the water hard. And then the chute started to drag him under. And even though they had a helo airborne and was over him just in a matter of seconds, really, what did they call him, a PJ? Or anyhow, the guy in the airplane, in the helo that's supposed to go down, he jumped out, got down there, but by this time the chute's already pulling him under. He couldn't get hold of him, and he went down, and they never recovered the body.
Wow.
And so...
Were you on the ship at that point?
Yeah. I had done my 4. I'm down below debriefing, when the klaxon went off. Man overboard is what the klaxon's telling us. So I quickly went up to what they call a vulture's row, which is on the island, but up several levels there. So you could see what was going on. Ship was in a turn, and I could see a spot in the water where there was some smoke, which I thought was maybe from the airplane, but it wasn't. When anybody goes in the water off the ship, they have smoke around the ship that you throw in the water. It's water activated, floats there, marks the spot so you can find them. And it became apparent after we watched for a while that nobody was coming out of the water. And so they canceled the rest of flight ops that day. Those of us that had already qualified passed, and we all rode the ship back in. But it was sort of a sad thing. I mean, I knew him. I can't remember his name now, but he was one of the guys that we were all flying together, doing our field landing practice. We all knew each other, but here he is dead. And I remember it going into my head that I better take this more seriously. You knew it could happen, but it did that first day.
Yeah, that's pretty stark, isn't it?
That was it was less than an hour of being, either in the landing pad or stuff. The first guy's dead.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, okay, make a mental note to not do that.
Yeah. Okay, so what happened after did you go out and do that more after that, or
no? That's they just want an introduction, and once you've got those four things, now you've got that in the back of your mind that you can do this. As you move on from basic jets, which was in Meridian, Mississippi, to advanced jets, which for me was in Kingsville, Texas, and so then I transitioned to the A-4, which was a fleet aircraft. I mean, they used it for bombing in Vietnam. And that was the trainer that we were using, it was a hotter airplane than the T-2 was.
Hotter meaning more powerful?
More powerful, more maneuverable, more all sorts of stuff. I found it interesting as I was a pilot learning to fly that thing. My instructor pilot was another LDS guy. He spotted me come through the system, so he became my primary flight instructor. Larry Vernon was his name, just a great guy, great pilot. In the A-4, you were way up at the point of the airplane, and the wings were way back behind you. And he said, level your wings. Well, I thought I was, but I was flying, with 5 or 6 degrees, wing down right or left. It took me a while to finally get used to that, so I didn't have to look behind me to see what I was flying wing down. But that was a great airplane, a 2-seater, instructors in the back seat. And we went through all the stuff, instrument flying, bombing, guns. That was
talk about those things, the bombing and the guns.
The bombs, they were little, I think they were 26 pound. They were little ones about this. They were fake, but they had a spotter charge in the back of them, a smoke and a flare. So once they hit, you could tell where they'd hit. With a real bomb, it was easy to see. Everything blew up.
Yeah.
But this stuff you learn the practice, the bombing pattern, and then when you transition to real bombs, which for us were 500-pounders, we dropped a lot of those. There were places you'd go to do that where they could handle live fire.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times there was a fuse on that thing. I remember it now. It was a 904. It was a little propeller on the front. And when you hooked it on the wing of the airplane, they had a wire that went through the propeller so it couldn't turn. But when it came off the bomb rack, the wire withdrew and the little propeller would start to wind up, wind would drive it. And after, I forget what the number of turns was, the firing chain was in line, and so it was a live weapon. And you drop those things, you see go boom. But if you didn't have enough, if you were too low or whatever, and it didn't have time to wind up, that 500-pound bomb traveling at 500 miles an hour and hitting the ground didn't go off. That still amazes me. That seemed like it ought to be enough to get it to go, but it didn't. So at Fallon, Nevada, which was the place where we would always do our practice bombing work when I was finally on the West Coast, you had live fire the last 2 days of your deployment there, and they'd have impact area. And every year they'd have to go out there and clean up all the duds because either you didn't arm it or you were too low and it never armed. And they were pulling out stuff. I would hate to have been those guys because
live ammo. That didn't go off.
Live ammo. Yeah, it was.
And when you're dropping the bombs, that's all just gravity. And how do you know when to let them off? What's that?
Well, in the training airplanes, the A-4, which didn't have an inertial navigation platform, it was you had a gun sight up in front there, and you set that to whatever the mil was. I think it was 110 mils, the deflection. And then you had to start from a predicted altitude and a predicted angle coming down at a predicted airspeed and release point, which is really tough because there's a lot happening in a hurry there. And getting good at that takes a while. So you'd fling bombs all over the neighborhood, but if you got good at it, you could get an average CEP, center impact point, I think they called it, of 5 bombs. If you were within 80 feet, you were doing good. But on a 500-pounder, you only had a 95% kill if you were within 5 feet of a truck. I mean, even a 500-pounder going off, the truck might still drive away. There was a 5% chance of that. But as you were farther and farther away, what you'd kill, you had to be close. And that was all iron sight bombing, they call it. You're looking at this, and in your head, all this stuff is going. And sometimes you'd tell more by the sound how fast you were going than looking at the airspeed indicator. But when we got to the A-7, that was an amazing airplane for back then.
And who made that? The A-7?
Lem Temco Vought LTV. And as you were coming down on that thing, you had this heads-up display, which was a combiner glass that was in front of the windscreen in front of you. And because the computer symbology was transferred on that, as you'd come downhill, you'd finally get to where you put the flight path marker on the target and designate. That didn't release the bomb. That said to computer, okay, computer, when you're satisfied, let it go. And there was a line that if there was no wind, you were just driving straight at the bomb and pulling the stick back. And when it knew that your nose up and your airspeed and your altitude and what you designated, it did all the computing on that stuff and let it rip. With that, the CEP, center impact point, you could have 15 feet just consistently.
Wow.
And so it was really an amazing thing. If there was a wind, what did they call that? There was a line that would tilt into the wind. And so you'd fly the flight path marker up that line. And as long as you were on that line, the computer would let go and understand that the wind was going to carry it back, and it still, hit the target. And this is back in 1972 or 3 or 4 that this thing was.
That's mind-blowing.
Yeah, and just a technical thing on it. If you go to your house and you look at what power is coming out of your wall, it's 60 cycle power, which determine, the generator is turning this fast, 60 revolutions per minute. So 60 cycles, an hour and a minute, anyhow. The cycle time is important. Well, they realized that the more computational cycles you could have with this inertial navigation system on the plane, the better. So the power in the A-7 was 400 cycle power.
Wow.
And so you'd get a lot of repetitions coming downhill, and the more you had, the better it was, and the more precise it was. So that was it was impressive to me.
Tell me about the guns. You were saying they trained you on the guns too. What was that like?
Yeah. In the A-4, it was just a little, I forget how many caliber it was, but, and you could count them, rat-tat-tat-tat-tat-tat, every time there was a thing going off. And
was that out the wing or out the front?
Well, in the A-4, they would hang it on the wing. So
Like a Gatling gun on the wing kind of thing, or?
Well, yeah, but anyhow, the problem is you're looking straight ahead, but this thing's offset by about 15 feet. So unless you take that into account, you're not going to hit this thing, the banner. And the banner was I think they took the guy that the skipper was maddest at that week. He was the banner driver, so he'd have to take off and drag this banner behind his airplane.
What's he flying?
He's flying an A4 as well. And this banner, I forget what it was, is probably 10 feet tall by 50 feet long. And he'd drag that out there. And then you had 4 students who were really
seems
excited.
Like a bad idea.
Yeah. It was. And they were firing away out there thinking they were killing this thing. And the bullets, your airplane would have something that on the business part of the bullet had a color, yellow, red, orange, green, something. So you could tell when it hit this banner that, that was pilot number, the green pilot or the yellow pilot. Not. So, and they'd bring that banner down. You look at it, there wasn't a hole in it because I volunteered one day to be the backseat guy in that because they were needing somebody to do that. And my job was just to fly straight and level while the instructor was in the back seat looking at these guys coming down. And they're supposed to be in a position that when they come down and shoot at the banner, they're shooting not 90 degrees off of the direction, but something.
Right. And
if they saw a guy that was called sucked, in other words, really dragging behind, his bullets were aiming at the banner, but also at you. And so he'd wave that guy off. And I'm up there in the front just trying to keep the airspeed and the altitude right. But every once in a while I'd look out there and I'd see these, my buddies who didn't know what they were doing shooting at me.
Shooting live ammo.
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah. That's crazy.
But in the A-7, it had was it 6 or 7 barrels that turned. It would fire at a rate of 4,000 or 6,000 rounds per minute. So you had 1,000 rounds in this canister. So you had, 6 or 7 seconds, you were out of bullets. And you didn't hear the bang, 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 bang. You hear a whoosh. And out in front of you, you'd see this heat wave because you've got thousands of wet bullets going off. Every 10th one is a tracer. And you look out there and you're thinking, my gosh, there's 10 in between each one, or 9 more in between each one of those. It was just amazing. And it would just, whatever it was on the ground, there was no hope for that. If you hit what you were shooting at, it was just going to shred whatever was down there.
So they trained you. Was it mostly air-to-air stuff, or was that for you to do air-to-ground stuff?
Both. This is back in the days where air combat maneuvering was it was considered gunfighting, and it was just like back in World War II,
like dogfighting with guns.
Dogfighting, yeah, and that was so much fun just because. Picture it in 3 dimensions. I mean, you're not just dealing with 2, you're 3, and you're high, and you're losing airspeed. You're low, you're picking up airspeed. You're turning hard, pulling G's, but you're bleeding off airspeed. And there's things you got to know when you're doing that to always keep yourself with more energy available to you than the guy that you're fighting. If he hamburgers it up and pulls too many G's and slows himself down, he becomes what we refer to as a grape. You had a chance to kill him.
Are you practicing that live then with other pilots, or how does that
no,
work?
You never had guns when you were doing that. You won when you'd start head on.
Okay.
And then after you'd done all these wooferdills and everything, a guy was starting to eat up the angles on you because he's working back to your 6 o'clock. And it's obvious who's winning now because he's back there and you're in front. That's not a good place to be.
Man, it's astounding to me all the things that you, especially if you're alone in there, just all the things you got to keep track of.
It was a lot, but it was like anything. After you've done it a while, it's muscle memory again, and things start to happen without you doing a lot of thinking. In fact, have you seen the latest Maverick movie where he tells his wingman, don't think, react.
Yeah.
And one of the cardinal rules of dogfighting is always turn into the fight, instantly turn into the fight. if you start off this way, and once you pass, the fight's on. Now you're starting to turn into that guy. If you're in the real world and there's MiGs out there and you spot one, you got to immediately turn to head on him, because otherwise he's already made up 60 angles on you, 60 degrees.
Yeah.
And so you just have to be used to instantaneously, reactively turn into the fight, which, if you're thinking of running away, it's too late already. If you can see the guy, because he's going to come up behind and kill you. Anyway.
So you trained for how many years?
It depends on when you get into the squadron. I moved from Kingsville, Texas, to Navy Lemoore in California, which is just south of Fresno.
And that was the A4?
That was moving from the A4 to the A7.
Okay.
So now you spend about 6 months learning the A7, what it feels like, all the different things. Every airplane feels different. And you're supposed to be using your instruments and all that stuff, but eventually you get the feel of the airplane, which helps you immensely.
And explain to everybody, the stick is literally cables, hydraulics. You're feeling it's not like today's planes.
Well, today's plane, they give you the feedback, but it's computer generated feedback, because when we pulled hard, we were pulling G's, and there were actually physical cables that went from the stick out to the ailerons, out to the vertical stabilizer and the horizontal stabilizers in the back. Today, everything is fly-by-wire, even on our commercial airplanes. There's nothing physical. If you lose power, you can fiddle with the stick all you want, or the yoke, or whatever they call it, but it's not going to do anything, because you put your input into a computer, and then the computer thinks about, okay, he wants to pull a lot of G's, but how many G's can I pull without departing and turning it into a spin or something? So, and there's double redundancy there too. But still, if you lose full power, there's not much you can do. And I never liked that idea. I like the idea there's always some input I could give, even if I had no hydraulic pressure. The A7, we had 3 hydraulic systems in there. And I still remember PC1 was roll, PC2 was pitch, and PC3 was yaw. And so the PC2 system was your major system in there. And you protected that. After you took off, there was an isolation valve. Don't ask me which side it's on. But that would shut off power on the PC2 system to certain parts of the airplane, so that if you get hit by shrapnel or by a missile or something, that's hopefully still there's enough of that intact to where if you make it back someplace you can land, you can force the landing gear down and the stick's still going to work. But with 3 systems in there, you can lose 2 of them and still get the airplane back. But if that happens, you're probably in really bad shape. You're lucky to be alive, and you may not make it back to a base or someplace you can land.
How did you end up in the A7? Tell that story.
The A7, I'd done well in my flight training, and I got to choose. I was the number one guy. 2 things happened. I got to choose my airplane. There were only 2 available at that time, an F4 out of Virginia Beach, and then they call it surgrad. I would plow back as an instructor pilot at the same base I was already at.
Yeah.
And a friend told me, you don't want to be an East Coast sailor, Virginia Beach being East Coast. You want to be out here to the West. Take that flight instructor position, and when you come up for your next set of orders, I'll get you into the same squadron I'm in, which he did. I ended up in VA 192 with him. So it turned out to be good suggestion, because I got the flight hours that I had in the training command. I came over to my fleet squadron with about 1,000 hours, where other guys were coming in with 300 or 400, which was beneficial. And then the Navy also had, got to understand the difference between regular Navy and reserve Navy.
Yeah.
Reserve Navy meant that if they had an overabundance of pilots, or it was the end of Vietnam winding down, they could just say, you're done, goodbye. If you're regular Navy, you could get court-martialed or killed, but the only other way out was for me to submit a letter of resignation.
So they were stuck with you, basically.
Yeah, and so I along with getting my first choice, I also got to be regular Navy, which it's nice to know that you control things and that you're not just hanging out there.
Why the A-7 over the F4?
Because my life would have been completely different had I not ended up on the West Coast. And so
the F4 was the East Coast.
The F4 was Virginia Beach, and and I didn't want to be a Mediterranean sailor.
Yeah.
I wanted West Coast, but with that also meant Vietnam. So again, being stupid, I went with what I thought was a good idea. And so when I came west, I was destined for a fleet squadron, and VA-192 was one of the two A-7 squadrons assigned to the USS Kitty Hawk, home ported in San Diego, California.
Describe the A-7 for people. What is it like?
It was a high-wing airplane, single pilot, single engine, great bombing system, the inertial navigation system, transonic, but only if you were coming down like this. You couldn't push yourself through the sound barrier that way. Fairly soon, I was what they call a test pilot in the squadron. So if they did an engine change, you had some stuff you had to do to test it before it came back. And one of those things was Bodie jams. You're slamming the power forward and back to make sure you don't get a compressor stall. And then you had to take it supersonic. So we do these Bodie slams at 20,000 and 30,000 feet, I think it was. And then you push the nose over and go supersonic. And interestingly, you get what's called control reversal as you're going through the sound barrier. If you've ever looked at it, you watch the shock waves that start to show up on the airplane. As those things finally come back to the ailerons or the elevators, and as you're passing through the sound barrier, you can pull the stick back, but the nose is going to go down, or you're going to push the nose forward and it's going to go up. But that's only for that little time when it's passing through the sound barrier. Once you're through, now you got controls again. So I just remember that scene the first time when I went through the sound barrier, having that funny thing happen, are you going to go left? Nope, it's going to go right. You're going to go up? Nope, it's going to go down. And but once you've pushed through it, then you got controls again. It's just when the shock wave is impacting that surface area, that control surface area.
Did the plane act different once you got through that barrier or no?
Didn't seem to me, but you didn't have a lot of time because now, as soon as you get through it, you've lost 10,000 feet. You better start recovering because otherwise you're going to go into the ground. So I didn't spend much time at all supersonic, but at least I'd been there a couple of times.
Let's talk about the squadron. You were explaining to me how the aircraft carrier, describe how the aircraft carrier is, how it works, and the one you were on.
The Kitty Hawk was 87,000 tons, which is huge. I mean, your destroyers are 5,000 tons. Your cruisers, if they even still have such things, are probably 10 or 15. World War II aircraft carriers were only about 30,000 tons. So 87, and now some of these newer ones that are newer than the Kitty Hawk, I think are over 100,000 tons. It's just a mass there in the water, which just to give you the example, we were a conventional carrier, and sometimes we would offload fuel to destroyers. And we would mush through the water even if you were dealing with 10 to 15 foot waves. The carrier just didn't move around a lot. I mean, think of that mass. And but a 5,000-pound destroyer coming alongside to take on fuel and taking green water over the bow as he's diving into that thing, those guys are just fighting to keep a position on you. And I used to like to watch everything that went on in the ship. And we were unrepping this destroyer one day, and the seas were rough. And so I was in the starboard catwalk where the ship comes along the starboard side. You run these cables across, and then you run hoses across, and you're dumping fuel into his. He was trying to maintain position in this heavy sea state. And I'm on this catwalk looking out there, my first time. And all of a sudden, the klaxon goes off on the destroyer next door, and he does what's called an emergency breakaway. He just cannot maintain position, so he's going that way. Meanwhile, we've got these wire ropes that are probably 1.25 inches steel that have been they run these dollies across them and the hoses across. They hadn't brought any hoses across yet, but these cables were, and they just snapped like they were rubber bands. I mean, the power, the power involved in these ships is impressive. And so I'm thinking, man, this is something. And meanwhile, these cables are coming across and snapping and crashing into the side of the ship. And that's when I realized I'm the only guy still standing. Everybody with any sense and experience is on the deck. So I went down there with them. But that and on the flight deck, it's about 3 acres of room on the flight deck. But when they're doing flight ops, you don't want to be there, though I would take my camera sometimes and be there. But you don't have any of the normal signals that tell you that you're in danger is what you can hear, a crash, a loud noise, whatever. Well, the whole flight deck is a crash, a loud noise, and everything that's going on there. So you keep your head, what they call on a swivel. You're just constantly looking for what's approaching you. And you've got not only that noise, you've got the vibration of the deck. You've got the heat. This is the South China Sea off of Vietnam, super humid. You've got, if there's any kind of a sea state, the ship is moving, bow up, roll, the yaw, what do they call that? No, anyhow, I can't remember all my Navy terms. I was good to get port and starboard. It took a long time. Anyway, so there's just all this noise about you, and you just become impressed on that flight deck looking around at the raw power that's there with everything that's going on. And so you generally don't want to be there unless you got to be there, because we had some interesting accidents, men overboard, blown over the side by getting the jet wash of a turning airplane. And 65 feet to the water is a hard hit. Not a fun thing. We had one of the guys, he was a yellow shirt, and airplane was in the groove and landing. And he thought, just because he thought he was an LSO, that it was going to take a 2-wire or a 3-wire. So he stepped back too soon, and these cross-deck pennants come in, and there's a big capstan there, and go down to the arresting engines. And he had stepped on the forward side of that one as this guy actually caught a 1-wire, and it just became like a hacksaw blade, and he just took off both of his feet just like that. And dangerous place to be up there. Not to mention there's bombs all over the place, and why some of those don't go off always amazes me. Anyway, you were asking about the Kitty Hawk, and Kitty Hawk's 5,000 people on the ship. About half of them, it's not exactly right, but it's close enough, belong to the ship, and they run everything: the galleys, the engines, the generators, the electrical systems, the radar, everything you can picture as you're looking at an aircraft carrier, they run. Then the squadrons are totally self-sufficient and independent, and we came out of Navy Lemoore. There were 2 A-7 squadrons, VA-192 and 195, and they each bring their 500-men complement and en masse go aboard the ship, and we're responsible for maintaining our 12 airplanes. Same thing with the A-6 squadrons. There were 2 of those. They came aboard with all of their people. There was an A-5, which is an interesting airplane. It is a hot airplane. I mean, it's powerful, but it never worked out as a bomber like it was supposed to be, the A-5. And so they used it as a recon one. It was full of cameras and stuff. And if we were doing what they called alpha strikes, which is a package of airplanes consisting of 20 to 30 airplanes, they always had one of those guys hanging on, because after you drop bombs, they would get going as fast as they could through the bomb area and do the pictures.
Take pictures.
Yeah, so you could see what you did. And then And so we had F-4 squadrons, fighters, and that's about it.
How many jets were on there, would you say, at any normally?
How
many jets were on the ship?
Well, the deck load, I think, was what they call 96, but some airplanes count for more than one. The A-5, I think, counted as 2. It just took up a lot of space when it was trying to be parked. A-7s, I think, were a 1. A-6s were a little bigger. They were, a 1.5. Anyhow, hangar deck and flight deck, you got this deck load of 96.
Wow.
But there was fewer airplanes than that. A typical launch would probably be 20 to 30 airplanes. And that was first launch in the morning. We do a 12-hour cycle, 12 on, 12 off, usually starting so you'd have some nighttime there too, because you had to keep so many night hours going to keep night qualified. So once they got the first launch off, the deck was a lot easier to maneuver around because you had parking spaces.
Right.
And then the last recovery at night was the hardest one because you're trying to find a place to park all these guys so that you're clear of the landing area and that. And it's a ballet. The guy, the air boss up in the tower there, he owns the flight deck. That's his area. And he's the one responsible for parking things either on the hangar deck or on the flight deck to make sure there's always room for that last guy.
Right.
Because it gets a little tight up there, excuse me.
Talk about landing at night.
Landing at night, you get comfortable during the day, except if it's rough seas and it gets a little more challenging. Everybody, if you were to think of the most fun amusement park you've ever been to and the most fun ride and how much fun that is, multiply that by 10 and then double it just to make sure. That's what it's like in the daytime flying around the carrier. It's just the most amazing thing to experience. At night, it's a totally different world. It's just absolutely terrifying. Occasionally, you'd hear some guy who talked about loving to fly at night. He's a liar. There's no one I ever met that enjoyed. Well, that's not entirely true. They have a thing called the commander's moon. Nighttime, they'd always give the darkest parts of night to the young guys, the JOs, junior officers. It was the commanders and lieutenant commanders that would take the ones where technically it's night, but you can still see horizon out there, or there's a full moon, commander's moon, they called it. But when you get out there in a dark, dark night where there's no moon and it's overcast, maybe the deck's moving because there's rough seas, well, you got your hands full trying to keep yourself alive and trying to land on that thing.
How lit up is the ship?
How what?
Lit up? Is it not lit up?
Oh, no.
You're landing on it dark.
Yeah, you don't want the ship to be a target. It's
Right.
not like, here I am, kill me.
Right.
They have moon glow lights. You have lights in the flight deck. But I'll tell you.
I can see you reliving it right now.
Well, yeah, there was a night hop. You always go out in pairs, but for some reason I was off by myself. I think it was under radar control. They wanted me to go look at this blip on the radar that was out here so many miles and this here and this here. So when it came back time to land, I was one of the last guys, and it was 0-0. In other words, 0 elevation of the clouds and 0 visibility, fog bank type of thing. So they bingoed me. Bingo just means alternate field. They send you away some. They sent me to Miramar. We were operating off of San Diego at that time and doing our workups ready for the next cruise. And usually with fog banks, if the ship would just move 10 miles one way or the other, you're out of it.
Yeah.
But I don't know what it is. They don't like to do that. But they should have this night. So anyhow, I'm being bingoed to Miramar, which I think this is great because you have limited fresh water on the ship. And the idea of a long hot shower doesn't exist. And Miramar meant, hey, this is great. I can get a good shower here. So I had landed there in the transient area of the field, and they were driving me over to the BOQ, Bachelor Officer's Quarters, when the truck driver got a call from the tower and said, "Take your pilot back." Apparently, the captain of the ship didn't know they'd bingoed me, and he was mad because you like all your airplanes on board.
Yeah.
So by now it's 1 or 2 in the morning, and I'm just, I've given up flying. My head's in the shower already, and now I got to go back and put on your flying face, which takes a little bit of an adjustment. So they've got me fueled up. I take off out of Miramar, and they fly me up to, I think, about 10,000 feet and send me out in the operating area. And I'm looking down, and it's just fog everywhere. And I can tell from my instruments the ship's there in the middle of the fog. And if they just moved 2 or 3 miles to the west, we'd be okay. But they didn't. And they vectored me down to a place. And the fog was only up to about 10 or 12,000 feet. So I wisely told them that I wanted to, once they got me, after the ship pointed in the direction they wanted me, I wanted to dirty up in the clear, VFR, visual flight rules. I didn't want to do that in the clag, they call it, or because when you do that, when you drop your flaps, it changes the way the airplane feels and flies. So I did that, which was a smart thing to do. But then, as I'm getting closer to the ship and it's time to start me downhill, almost instantly I'm in the fog. And the fog means 0 means you have 0 elevation to the bottoms of the clouds and 0 visibility ahead. I mean, it's 0. You look out the windscreen, it's milk. It's just fog. There's nothing you can see. So now I've got to be completely on instruments. And they're giving me vectors and headings and telling me altitudes they want me at. And then when they get you, your minimums are 200 feet and a half mile in the A-7. In other words, you cannot legally attempt a landing if you have less than 200 feet of elevation, that to the ground, or a half mile visibility straight ahead. I had 0 in both of those. And they were keeping me coming back. And I should have just told them then, hey, I'm not going to land in this. I could have legally done that. But that doesn't do much for your reputation on the ship. And especially if you got a mad captain, you need to do what he's saying. So it was just stupid for me to keep this thing going. When you get to a half mile, they say, call the ball. And at that point, I looked up because I was on my instruments down here. I looked up, milk. Nothing.
How do you know you're half mile if you can't see it? Is it on radar or
something? Yeah. Well, they tell you half mile, call the ball.
Okay.
That's at night. During daytime, they call zip lip. There's no call. They figure in the daytime you can take care of yourself. And also you have an instrument in there that tells you how many miles you are from the ship. So I'm there, and I'm supposed to be at about 200 feet in that area and looking for the optical landing system, and then I'm in good shape. One of the things I had going for me that night, the LSO, I just lost his name. It's been 50 years, but anyhow, really good guy, absolutely great guy, knew him well, great LSO, great pilot, great stick, they call him, and just a gentleman. And so he's on the frequency, but he's not supposed to say anything until your airplane gets in close, which is half mile. Then he'll come up on the air if he thinks he needs to, which tonight he needs to because he looks out. And he said, the first call I got from him was, keep it coming, you sound lined up left. I thought, it told me a couple of things. One of them was he couldn't see me any more than I could see him. But it sounded like I was in the right area, which doesn't help you at all. So now I'm probably 15 seconds away from touching down. You eat up that last half mile very quickly. And so I'm getting calls from the GCA. Well, that's a ground controller, but this is CCA carrier controlled guy. And I'm doing well because I'm on heading, I'm on glide path, which is no easy thing. But every 2 or 3 seconds. And you didn't have a lot of those 2 and 3 seconds in line before I was either going to become part of the deck or, safely aboard. And so I'd look up, nothing, back down. And he's not saying anything either. So I'm knowing other than this radar controller that's taken me down. He has 2 views on his screen, by the way. One is this, as if he's over my head, so he can get line up left to right there. And the other one is a glide path or glide slope, and he's looking at that. He can see me whether I'm high or low. And
are you getting call outs inside in your headphones of how high the airplane is, so you don't have to look at the instruments?
Yeah, yeah, but you have to depend on the instruments because he can tell you where you are, but unless you can look at your primary instruments, what they call the AJB3, Abba Jabba, but that was a sphere where you could see nose attitude, you could see wing attitude, and you could see heading. That's your primary. That gives you most of the information you need. You need the angle of attack, and you need the airspeed.
But the plane wasn't automated to say 600 feet, 200 feet as you were landing. You were, oh, wow, that seems so complicated.
No.
Holy smokes.
It's so, and anytime I look out, I know that's taken up 2 to 3 seconds, and I don't have a lot of those left. I've got maybe 3 or 4 of those cycles complete.
Still no ship in your sight.
No, nothing. And nor has he given me any good information. Then finally, with about, I would say 4 or 5 seconds to go, he said, "I got you." Now, I'm taking a peek, but I don't know who he's talking to because I can't see the ship. But of course, it's not well lit at night anyway. But he said, and I know I'm on heading, which I can't see the ship, so I'm not sure. And I know I'm close to glide slope because the radar guy's still talking to me while this guy, Dave Carroll, guy's name was Dave Carroll, his next set of orders after he was on the Kitty Hawk was he was the commander of the Blue Angels, which is a feather in your cap. That they don't let slouches do that sort of stuff. So anyhow, he says, "I got you a little power to get here." So I squeak on a little power, and he may have given me a lineup call. I don't remember, but almost the same time he said that, I had a little bit of power. Bang! I hit the deck. And it's no more violent than any other landing because they're all violent. One of those signs in the ready room was a carrier landing is an act of violence. And that describes it to some degree. And I could feel the tug of the wire. And I came to a stop where normally I would look to the right and I'd see the island. This is at night, and the island, on the island is the ship's number. The Kitty Hawk is a 63. And these are numbers that are probably, I'd say 20 feet high. I mean, they're big. And I'm looking through the fog, and I can just see a glow out there, and maybe just a hint of a 63. So I landed that night, having never seen the aircraft carrier, depending totally on Dave Carroll to not kill me, which he didn't. But that was luck. I dare say there aren't many people that have done that. Now it's all automatic. These guys let go of the stick and.
Do they really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, they can. I mean, these things are. We had them. They were called. What were they called? I can't remember the name we used, but anyhow, the Phantoms had that stuff, and they could completely let go. Though you keep your hand close to the throttle and the stick in case you got a spurious input, and it tried to send you off someplace. But now I'm sure that it's mostly automatic because everything's just gone light years away from what we, picture 50 years ago.
So you hit the deck, you come to a stop, you must be in a cold sweat on there. Well, and were you mad, or you know what I mean? Was there repercussions to anybody? Because that seems crazy. That
the whole idea that they expected me to do that when it was totally illegal. I mean, you're just not supposed to do that. That's an accident just waiting to happen. But my first thought was, my gosh, what a great pilot. But then I had to stop myself, as I stopped myself many times there. I always felt that I was looked out for, and I quickly went from the, boy, what a great pilot, to thank you, Lord. And meanwhile, normally they would be very quickly trying to get me to taxi out of the landing area, but I was the last airplane. So they just tied me down right there. And then I got the canopy open, climbed out, and I wasn't shaky or anything. I mean, I pretty well learned how to not feel that way. But there was still enough adrenaline in me that, I couldn't get to sleep that night. Most night hops were like that. And there were some times I was out there when the deck was pitching and there was lightning crashing all around, where everything looked good and I was ready to feel the contact of the deck and the wire, when the deck just dropped out from underneath me. And then, okay, I'll go around, try it again. Hope the timing's better this time around, because you can't predict it. It's physics, what the sea's going to do to the aircraft carrier. And there's learning that you've learned to get down to a certain point in the sky, and you're hoping that the deck is there when you get there. And sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't. Or the one thing you never want is deck coming up, you coming down. So the LSO has to wave you off as he's back there and filling what the ship's doing. These guys are pretty good.
Tell that story. I don't think we have when we were recording it. The guy who slammed down so hard that the landing gear. Tell that story.
Well, yeah, that was a friend of mine, another LDS guy, but in the other squadron. We had 3 LDS guys in our squadron. He was the only LDS guy in his squadron. And night carrier qualifications or carrier ops off of San Diego again, getting ready to go off on cruise.
Yeah. And he was coming down and things were looking pretty good. But then something went wrong and he was given a wave off. And a wave off means you just add power and you take it around and you try it again. And but he made the mistake of pulling the stick back. It's a natural tendency that you have. You add power, you want to pull the stick back because you want to get going up. Well, on carrier aviation, you don't do that. You set an attitude as you're coming down, and you control your altitude with the power. And if you rotate the nose up, picture the back end of the airplane where the hook is, it's going down because you're rotating around a center of gravity, depending on what that is in the airplane. And so he's starting to pick up power and speed as the hook drops down and grabs a cable. Well, that cable, doesn't matter what you are, how big you are, how fast you're going, it's going to stop you. And so he was starting to come up and the cable stopped him and just slammed him down on the deck. And hard enough to where the nose gear was punched up through the intake, the jet intake, and all the junk, bolts, nuts, metal, was sucked into the engine and tore up the compressor and the turbine section of the airplane there until it became a Roman candle. And it's just shooting sparks out the back end, which is bad for everybody back there, LSO included, because these are little parts that are traveling really fast. They're all bullets, really. And so, and I happened to be airborne, and I was at a beam position, which means I was the next one to land. I was ready to make my left turn, go into the groove, and come down. And meanwhile, later to become my business partner, another LDS guy, he had just landed and they were taxiing him out of the landing area. And because the nose gear on the A-7 is almost directly below you, if maybe not a little bit behind you. So when they taxi you up forward, the plane captains just took perverse delight in this. They would taxi you forward until that nose gear was just right up to going off the bow end of the ship. And meanwhile, you're farther off. You're over the water now. And Terry was anticipating a hard brake and a right turn. When this kid saw what had happened in the landing area, he saw that the what do they call those things? Anyhow, at night you're using flashlights with a cone on the front. Yeah.
and he got the emergency stop, which he was ready to do because he didn't want to go at the front end. And then he saw these things running down the deck, headed that way, so he could be helpful to whatever went on in the landing area. And meanwhile, Terry's up there with his nose over the front of the deck, looking down in the water, thinking, I hope they come back in a hurry, because, your legs start to, when you got the brakes on, they start to, they can lose the power, the ability to hold the brakes down. But anyhow, they got Mike's airplane shut down and the fire under control. And here comes the guy with the wands up there, finishes the turn, parks the airplane for Terry. He's telling me this later because that night I was bingled back to Miramar, and Terry's already down, so he's on the ship as they're trying to. And Mike, once they got him out of the airplane, that crash, call it, had affected him. I mean, he's not there mentally. He's been like a fighter, and he's been punched in the head. And so they get him out of the airplane. They figure he's okay. They'll go back to getting the, whatever they got to do with the airplane, get it out of the landing area so they can get the ship back up and running again. Meanwhile, he's just sort of in a daze wandering around the flight deck. And there are, in the catwalks, there are nets there that'll catch you. But they aren't very big. And, you could wander off the flight deck, fall in the water 65 feet down, probably going to knock you out. And then at night, they may not be able to find you again to pull you out of the water. Lots of, I'm reliving this stuff now, thinking about all the things that could have gone wrong with that didn't, and all the things that went right. Amazing. We had a couple of guys 2 days in a row blown off the flight deck. They were up in front of the island, which I call the corral, we called that area. They were spinning an A-6 around, and this guy popped his head out of the catwalk. Catwalk's about chest high below the flight deck. Hit him in the chest, and over the side he went. There was a daylight, fortunately. And as soon as they have that, anybody who sees it happen is supposed to grab one of these floater smokes things off the side of the ship and throw it in the water. You have a greater chance of being hit by one of those things than you worry about sharks or whatever it is in the water. And then once they go off, you can't breathe because there's smoke everywhere. But anyhow, they managed to get the first guy out. The next day, same exact thing happened, the same place. So they pulled that guy out of the water. And then the next day, there was a guy being escorted from the brig across the hangar deck over to, I don't know where they were taking him, but he didn't like the brig, so he just bolted and jumped off the side of the ship, which was stupid. We happened to be over 200 miles away from land. He didn't know that. And they had to go collect him, and he didn't want to. He was fighting the guy that was coming down to, hook him up and get him into the helo. So they had to knock him out, to get him.
Oh, my gosh.
So for 3 days in a row, we had interesting overboard drills. That was just typical of some of the stuff that goes on there. I'm amazed that our aircraft carriers do as well as they do. There are just so many things that can go wrong, but so many things they make go right. And occasionally you get somebody on the news, what was it, 2 or 3 months ago, a carrier that was in the Red Sea, they lost an F-18 over the side because nobody had tied it down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's crazy how complex.
Yeah.
Describe what's life on the aircraft carrier like? Is it just like being in a big city with their food and
Well, yeah. Decks are made, if you're on an O deck, it's above the hangar deck. And so my room was on the O3 level, which puts it right below the flight deck. And all during the cruise, as new people check in and check out, they reposition everybody based on seniority. Mm. So I had to move a lot of different times. One time, I ended up in a room below the flight deck, but where the cat track came through my room. And I was in the upper bunk in that thing there. And when they'd fire that thing, you'd, stand up and salute. But there was no room. This is a V-shaped thing that was, had some soft stuff on it, but it was right above my bunk. And when they'd do the first shot in the morning, I'd hit that thing. But there are always two of you in a room unless you're a senior officer. Then you get one on your own. And if you're really junior, we had the bunk room, and there had 6 of us in there for a while. But you could either go to the dirty shirt, which was up forward on the 03 level, and get a hamburger, or you could go eat in the state or in the officers' mess, which it was all pretty good food. Though
was it kind of like any time, day or night? Food was available or no?
Well, there were times for the officers' mess when you could come and eat. The dirty shirt, you can go in there and get a hamburger anytime. In fact, I fell in love with Reuben sandwiches. I loved those Reuben sandwiches. They were only in the dirty shirt, so I'd always get me a Reuben sandwich. But the enlisted guys, their mess was on the first deck. I think it was either the 01 or it was the number 1 deck, which is now you count them going down. And we always walked through there, and they had steaks. They had a lot better stuff than we ever had. Lobster. What's the fairness here? And we had to pay for ours too. I mean, theirs was all part of their service. But
how many decks were on the ship, would you say?
The 04 was the flight deck, so that was 4 decks above the hangar deck. And then you have to move to the island now, and it went up to the I-9 or 10 or maybe 11 up there. And then going the other direction, I used to, because I was the weapons officer, I had to go into the SAS spaces where they stored special weapons. And I think that was I think the brig was on the 7th deck, below the waterline. You never want to be below the waterline.
Yeah.
And then I used to explore the ship all I could just because it was fun for me. But they have these things called the shaft alleys. We had 8 machinery rooms, and because we had 4 screws on the ship, 4 of those were main machinery rooms, they called them, and that's where you had the things that would drive the screws. But, the picture, these are lined back to back from aft to forward. And you had to get the power from the farthest machinery room forward all the way back to the screws. And so they had shaft alleys, and you get down in there, and it was just this shaft that's probably about that big in diameter that went from the motor to the propeller in the back there. And bearings every 15, 16 feet, maybe 20 feet, they keep those things in. Then you just look down there and you'd see this thing go back. So I used to do that. I used to go every place I could go until I was kicked out. But then the next day I'd try it again when somebody else was on duty, and sometimes I wasn't kicked out. So I got to see most everything I wanted to see.
And you said that was driven by steam.
Yep. They had boilers. We had 3 million gallons of Navy distillate fuel, but along with other tanks, it carried avgas, jet fuel, and then what else do we have? Anyhow, there were a lot of different tanks around, and a lot of things that would blow up and catch fire. So we did do a lot of time practicing fire drills because that was the most common thing that you could have. And but everything was dangerous. The worst thing on the flight deck were prop airplanes because of all the noise, you couldn't hear it, but you could walk into it. Mm. And then the A-7 had a low intake on it, and that was something that occasionally somebody gets sucked into. And I was up on the flight deck once getting ready for launch, and the engine was started, and I was leveling my inertial platform, which takes about 20 minutes, so you don't want to be moving the airplane. But out of the corner of my eye, I caught a purple shirt or a blue shirt, whoever he was, carrying a backpack of chains, walking right like he was going to cross right in front of my intake. And if you're a few feet away, say 10, 12, 15 feet, you're okay. Unless you're up to 100% power, then it becomes this big vacuum cleaner that just sucks things in. And he was going to walk right in front of my airplane. And even though it was going to get the air boss just mad at me if I turned my engine off, because then they have to redirect a huffer. I'm in the way of everybody. It just drives him crazy. But I wasn't going to kill this guy. So I was just reaching over to grab the power control lever and shut down when this yellow shirt, big guy, I mean, big guy. He was a football player from someplace. He spotted this blue shirt or purple shirt walking and saw where he was going to go. Just launched and tackled him and knocked him out. I mean, he was out cold, the poor guy. He had the cranial helmet, so maybe he wasn't bleeding, but he was not moving either. And he looks up, big grin on his face, gives me a thumb up. Give him a thumbs up. They drag him off, and then I can go do my launch. But everybody's looking out for everybody else there. But even with that, things can happen. And
explain too. I don't think we got this recorded. When you're coming in, your hands on the throttle, and the minute you think when you're landing, you're ready to go full blast again.
That's right. As soon as you touch down, as soon as you feel the wheels hitting the ground or the deck, you go 100% power. And if you grab a wire, you're still not going anyplace. That wire is going to hold you. So even though you're up to 100% power, then you quickly bring it back to idle. But you do that so that in case you miss it, you've already got 100% power on this turbofan engine that takes a while to run up. And then you're going around in the pattern, simple bolter, and come around, try it again.
Okay, another thing they'd love to hear about, aerial refueling. Learn about that, and how was that when you did it?
Yeah, if you watch the pictures you see of the Air Force doing it, you'll notice that they have a boom in the back of the airplane, which a guy is actually flying that thing. There's a crew member back there, and the Air Force has on the top of their airplanes a slot that they'll try and bring that toes down to and just move in. So in the Air Force, you're just flying a position off the refueling airplane, and then this guy does all the work to get it in. In the Navy, we have what's called a basket. There's a drogue chute that comes out of the refueling package that is on the wing of an A-6. The A-6s help with fuel, and there's always one of those airborne during launch or recovery. And then when he's ready to come down, they have another A-6 up there that takes off, and then he tops off from that A-6, fills up his tank. That first guy comes down and lands. So there's already somebody up there about, 2,000 or 5,000 feet above the ship. But anyhow, call sign is Texaco. And they send you up to find him. But these guys are pretty sharp. Once they know who they're looking for, they're trying to find you too. You first of all have to get matched with airspeed and everything, get behind him. He strings the drogue chute out. And as he does, this basket opens up, and it's probably bigger than a basketball hoop. But now the trick is, in the A-7, our probe wasn't right on the nose, so you weren't in direct line to drive into that thing. Ours would be flush with the aircraft, but when you're going to refuel, you have a button in your cockpit, you push it, and this thing would come out. It was about out here is where it was. And then you had to try and get that thing in the basket. And that's no easy thing. Especially, again, my friend, the same one that was on the front of the ship while that guy that was supposed to be directing him was running off to the accident behind him. Somebody before him had plugged, and then once you plug and you move forward just a little bit, then maintain that position, then they'll start to send the fuel down into you. And they don't give you a whole lot. They just want to give you enough for maybe one or two passes. They may give you 500 pounds. I remember the first time I fueled at night off of Hawaii and I needed, I says, give me 3,000. And the guy just laughed. He says, no, I'll give you 700. So he watches what he's giving you and then turns it off.
And is it the thing, anytime you're flying missions off the deck, that those planes are up there ready to refuel?
Yeah. And the night that I had to do it off Hawaii, we were doing a thing called RIMPAC, which was a joint exercise with the Australians, New Zealanders, might have had Canadians in it too. And you're working together, the green group and the red group, and you're fighting each other, supposedly. And they had given me an airplane with a blivet. It was a big thing that looked like a drop tank on my wing, but they use it to haul, if you're coming aboard and you got your gear and stuff with you, you load it in there. But a lot of drag. And so my lead, who happened to be the skipper of the squadron, and I are out looking for bad guys off the ship. Well, while I'm doing that, I'm burning up a lot more fuel than the lead is. And so I got his attention, and you don't talk a lot at night, but I got up close enough where I could turn on the lights in the cockpit, gave him the weeping signal, and then gave him, I need fuel, and then told him how much I had. And I could tell his eyes were rolling because I wasn't going to get back to the ship unless I got some fuel. So then at night you had to plug in, which is not easy. But my friend, again, I was starting to tell you, it was his turn to go plug. But the guy in front of him had backed out and pulled out too soon and started down before he was out of the basket and bent it. So this thing was doing figure eights as he was trying to plug in it, which he was able to do. But you think of anything that can go wrong. It can go wrong in funny ways, and that was one of those.
So getting 700 gallons, how long would you be hooked up to it? Was it fast?
Not long. It would take, I don't think it took a minute, maybe a little bit more, and I had what they were going to give me. So then went down and made it. You almost always it's first pass. Seldom do you have bolters. In the daytime, you never do have bolters. If you do, you're going to be razzed by everybody on the ship. But then at nighttime, that happens occasionally. So if you get enough fuel for one extra pass, you're usually pretty good.
Did you have any close calls mechanically, the planes? You personally?
No, nothing you couldn't fly your way out of. Sometimes I had hydraulic system failure, sometimes radio failures, that stuff. But you'd trained to work that stuff. I'll tell you one thing though, that you think about things in your life that you regret. A little bit of a background. As we were getting ready to deploy, normally you've had all your pilots in the squadron for several months, so that you're working together, you know each other and all that stuff. But we had a guy that still was about 3 months before the cruise, but he was ordered in, and he was a guy out of the Naval Academy that had gone through that way. First name was either Greg or Craig. That's why I asked to begin with.
Yeah.
And I think it was Greg. And young guy, and it takes you a while not to break in. Everybody's trying to be kind to you, but to make some friendships and relationships among your squadron mates. And he was going through that process, and he found out, I think probably a conversation we had in the ready room, that I had some woodworking equipment. I had a table saw, and he was building a cabinet and was ready to do some drawers, and he asked if he could come by and if I'd help him with the table saw. I said, sure. So, we weren't great friends, but I was willing, and he was a nice guy, young guy, and I knew what that was like to be the new guy.
Yeah.
I won't tell you what they called us, but I will too, FNGs, which is effing new guy. That was part of the Navy. Anyway, so we worked together, and he gets his drawers built and all that stuff.
You're doing that on the ship?
No, this is
before.
This is before, training? Yeah. This is at 3 months before we're ready to go.
Yeah, okay.
And he's trying to work his way into just the guys. So now we're getting close to going in, and there are rules in the Navy, and I can't remember what they all are, but if you go for a certain amount of time, I want to say 3 weeks without doing a carrier landing, then you have to do some practice stuff on the field and stuff. It's the nature of things. You gotta put checks in those boxes. So we're all getting ready, and we're doing night carrier landing practice on the field in Navy Lemoore, which is a 14,000-foot runway. But we take off with a short load of fuel. 10,500 is what we can carry, but we only fuel internally. Don't put anything in the wings. We just take 5,000 pounds, and we launch right into the pattern. So rather than taking off, flying up, going up to altitude, doing stuff, you just launch into the landing pattern, which is about 1,000 feet above the ground. And we start doing our practice landings, and there's an LSO there that controls us. He's got his radio at the end of the runway, and he's pretending like it's on the ship. And we all have to do, and I can't remember what it was. I want to say it was 4, but it might have been a few more than that. And then you go in a hot seat, and I think I explained that before, where they tie the airplane down. They bring the fuel truck over, and they start to pump up the fuel. Meanwhile, while the engine is running, you climb out of the airplane, and the pilot that's next in line climbs in, and he launches in the pattern and does his. And that saves you just a ton of time, not having to restart the airplane, and that it's just an efficient way of getting everybody in so they can get their turn. So I'm one of the first ones to go, so as soon as I'm done, I can go home. And my house is, there's Lemoore, then there's Hanford where we lived, and it's about a 26-mile trip for me to get from the hangar back to the house. And I'm the first one done, so I'm ready to go. As I get into maintenance control, which is our ready room was up on the top deck of this hangar, but maintenance control is right down at ground level because everything that goes out to the airplanes to work on them happens from that point. And since we're all hot seating, that's where we're waiting for them to say, okay, Fred's in, you're up, go. And and yellow sheets is where you write up the gripes on the airplane. Every time you take a flight, sometimes nothing happens, but sometimes something strange is happening, and so you write it up. And either the maintenance guys look at it right then, or they say, okay, that's something we'll work on later tonight. So, and then as a pilot coming, you go through the yellow sheets, look at the last 6 or 7 entries just to see if there's something odd there that you got to be aware of. So I'm there filling out yellow sheets on the airplane. I just given to one of the other guys already, and I see Greg, and it's not well lighted down in this room in the maintenance control area, and he's just sitting back there quietly in a corner, waiting for his turn for an airplane. And I look at him, and I say, "Hey, Greg, how you doing?" And he looks at me. He just sort of gives me a head nod. But it was that thing where this is the part I regret, that I didn't walk over and sit down and talk to him, because in hindsight, I can tell that he's got the weight of the world on his shoulders. He's not really ready to fly, but you give that Tony the Tiger, great, I'm ready. Send me out there, coach. And I should have said, sat down with him. Hey, Greg, how you doing? And just at least got his head off of whatever it was he was thinking about. And he was even hunched down.
Something was off.
Navy aviators always chest out. Yeah, I'm ready. Send me, coach. But he just wasn't. But after he acknowledged me with a head nod, I got in my truck and headed home. Before I got home, he was dead. He'd taken off, okay, turned downwind, and then as he got to the beam position, which is where you make your final turn upwind and to land, he flew into the ground. And the LSO had seen that, and he called him by number, November Hotel 30, whatever it was, watch your altitude. And then he quickly changed to, hey, Greg, watch your altitude. And Greg, pull up, pull up, pull up. Boom, he hit the ground. And it killed him. And what they do, Navy, and I'm sure the Air Force is the same way, they organize an investigation board for the accident. And I happened to be on the list. It was my turn to do that. So I was on the accident investigation board for his death. And what you do in those instances was, when an airplane goes down, those that are collecting the parts go to the point of initial contact and then determine the direction of the airplane at that time. And they put a tape down there, a measuring tape down there, big one, that goes out maybe 1,000, 2,000 feet, depending on what it is. If it's a straight down one, you don't need that much tape, but it's like this one where it was gradual. And then as they start to pick up parts, they go out here and say, okay, it's on 21 feet from here, and it's 5 feet off to this side. And they collect every part and piece and put it down that direction as they collect all the parts of that. And so I went out there the next day, and You could see where the initial impact point was, and the impact of the crash caused the seat to eject. At least that was what we figured, because this face curtain hadn't been pulled, nor had the alternate handle, which is below the feet here. So we're thinking the impact shot the seat off, and he's still in it. And then I could see where the impact point of the seat is. The seat, the ejection system on jets is amazing stuff, and they're programmed and they have rocket motors, and there's ways to keep them upright. You don't want them tumbling and that stuff. So his seat went up, and then I could see where the back of the seat, the back corner of the seat had hit the ground. And then right there in front of that was the heel of his boot. His foot had hit the ground there. The heel had come off, and there that was. And then he was found some way a little bit farther down there. I can't remember what the distance was. And it was the kind of thing that they had an open casket. It wasn't that violent of a crash, but because I was on the accident board, I had to look at the pictures of him on the slab and then look at the coroner's report. And he hit hard enough that his heart had ripped out, detached inside his body. And I was thinking the whole time I'm out there, why didn't I stop? Why didn't I try and talk to him? And in the course of the accident investigation, what they do is they take the last 72 hours of your life and they go back through every part of it to look for any stressors, anything that's going on there. And I didn't know it, but, he was going through a divorce with his wife. And some people called it suicide by ejection or something, but I don't think that was it. I think his head was not in what he was supposed to be doing. And I've often thought, had I gone over there and just engaged him in conversation, it may have broken whatever he was thinking about right then. Or I could have looked at him and said, "Hey, Greg, let's go talk to the skipper. You're not ready for this tonight. Let's try it again tomorrow." But I didn't. And so that's one of those regrets I have, because I had done that thing with him in the table saw, and helped him. They assumed I was his friend, which I was probably starting to be, but we weren't yet.
Yeah.
The skipper asked me if I'd go with him to the funeral, the family was in Kansas.
Yeah.
And so we took a couple of airplanes, flew out there, and that was interesting too, because you've been to funerals and they always have neighbors and stuff that come in, or friends that set up food for people.
Yeah.
And they sit in there and they talk about the person, and a lot of time it's fun stories and stuff like that. And they were doing that with him after we'd been to the cemetery, and they'd done the 21 gun salute, and they'd given her the flag, the mom. And she was just having a horrible time with this, I could tell. And so we're back at the house, and people are laughing, and the mom's finally over there by herself. And, what do you say? But I had noticed, even though this was a Christian funeral in a Christian church, I'd paid attention to the preacher, and he never once mentioned the resurrection. And I was thinking, that's interesting. And the place was packed with neighbors and friends. It was, and music in this particular church, I don't know which one it was, but they don't have musical instruments visible in the chapel. They didn't have a piano or an organ there that you could see it. But they had this beautiful quartet of women that sang a piece, and they were someplace else in some other room someplace. You could hear their voices, but they weren't out there. And these were just interesting things, as I think about typical LDS funerals. And so I was thinking, I got to give her some hope. So when she was finally alone and deep in grief and all that stuff, I just went over to her and I said, "Hey, understand this, that you'll have a chance to embrace your son again, to hug him. And this is not the end. There is a resurrection. Because Christ was resurrected, we all will be. And you haven't seen your son for the last time. You'll be able to embrace him again someday. And her look was strange. It's almost like she didn't understand it or comprehend it. And I don't know if I did any good for her or not. But I just wanted to give her some hope that there was something beyond what she saw in the casket, which he looked strained in the casket, but, it wasn't grotesque. But it was, anyway, I tell you that those are the real things that most pilots and most aviators never talked about. But we all thought we were indestructible and would last forever, but you don't.
Yeah.
Yeah. Here I am at 2 months shy of 81, and I got more days behind me than I got ahead. But it's nice to know that death isn't the end.
Vietnam. It was mostly over? Did you fly missions over there? Or what happened there?
we flew a lot of missions. We did a lot of saber rattling is what we called it. They'd always bring out some Vietnamese generals to the deck of the Kitty Hawk, and we'd put on air shows for them and drop some bombs and that sort of stuff. But this was, as I recall it, I think 73 was the year of the ceasefire. And so there was no more shooting going on. But just as an indication of how inherently dangerous what we did was, of the 15 pilots that were in that group, within 3 years, 4 of them were dead. That's a 25% attrition. But just crashes, dumb things. And so even though nobody was shooting at us, it wasn't a safe thing to do.
Yeah, it sounds like even on the aircraft carrier, right? Like on any deployment, there's a few deaths and a lot of accidents.
Oh, yeah. Going over, it was 21 days from San Diego to Vietnam via Subic Bay in the Philippines.
Yeah.
And on the first cruise, we were beyond Hawaii. I think we were near Johnson Island out in the Pacific. We had a fire in one of the main machinery rooms. And I told you I explored the ship. I would occasionally go down there, but I never liked to go down there because you had to go through these small hatches to get down there. The ambient temperature was probably 130 degrees in there, and the boilers going off, and there was a little bit of fuel dripping here and a little bit of this. It was just waiting to blow up, which it did, and killed 3 guys, I think it was, and one of them, had made it to the ladder out, and he was burned in that position, feet on the ground, ready to make that first step, but just overcome to where he couldn't make it. So as we pulled into Subic Bay, we transferred the bodies over to, I think they ended up in Clark Air Base, where a C-130 probably took them back to the States. That's sort of sobering. And we spent the first 2 weeks in this Vietnam cruise reworking that boiler and stuff. They had to rebuild that machinery room. And in 2 weeks, they had it done. And so we were back on the line.
In situations like that, is it just rumors spreading on the boat? Is there something official?
No. There very seldom were there rumors. They had, the 1MC was the sound system on the Kitty Hawk that when the captain wanted to say something, it was everywhere in the ship. And so they'd give us explanations of what had gone on and how many dead there were and where the guys were from, what their names were, that sort of stuff. You were seldom in the dark except for the typical fog of war. You don't know what's going on outside the ship.
Yeah.
So anyhow, it was an interesting life. In fact, when I returned from the sea cruise, back to Navy Lemoore, and my next set of orders was back to Lemoore to VA 122 as a transition pilot. The fleet replacement group was what we were. So guys coming from other parts of the Navy getting ready to acquaint themselves or reacquaint themselves with the A-7. We do that, bombing, landing aircraft carrier. You never give up a chance to get one last catapult shot or one last landing. So when I got to the end of my time in that squadron, they had a carrier detachment going out, and they needed a couple of pilots to just be there and help direct traffic and all. So I'll volunteer. So I got to do the practice field stuff and night stuff, hoping that I'd get one more arrested landing. But didn't. But they let me have an airplane to fly off and take back to Lemoore. So I got one final cat shot. But those are things that any naval aviator always looked forward to, even though it was dangerous. That was a part of who you were. And so I never got that last carrier landing, but I got a last cat shot. And I was 9 years in by then. 20 years, you're up for retirement. So I was halfway there, really. And I seriously thought about that. In fact, Gail, my wife, and I talked about it, whether I should do that. But I'd been in long enough to see the negative impact it was on families. A lot of these guys that I flew with, good guys, but if they'd been around for a while, like the skipper, the executive officer, the ops officer, their families were normally a mess because, when you're a single parent trying to raise kids, it didn't work out. So I decided I probably ought to be a dad. So I turned my back on that and never rented an airplane, never went back out in a Cessna, never had the desire to do that because doing that was in no way close to what we did. The speeds weren't there. The G's weren't there. The fun wasn't there. I couldn't see putting around in one of those things. So I've never put my hand on the stick since.
Do you know who Gene Fulmer is? The boxer, Gene Fulmer, the boxer?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. I'm going to ask you this question because I asked him this, and I think I know your answer, but I asked him once, he and his brothers, I did a show with them, and they, if you ever shook his hand, it was like he had rocks for hands, little short stubby fingers.
Didn't he name all these kids the same first name?
I don't know, but and he was a mean son of a gun, really fascinating guy, but just tough, and he and his brothers were tough. But I remember asking him if there was any fight that he went into that he just didn't think he was going to win. And there was just without hesitation, it was like, no, I just went in. I knew I was going to win. There was no fight I didn't think I was going to win.
Yeah.
So I thought, okay, that makes him a little different than normal people, I think, wondering.
Oh, yeah.
Did you, to fly like that on the deck, I mean, obviously that night with the fog, but did you ever doubt yourself? Or once you got going, it was just, you just knew it was going to happen, and you didn't doubt yourself.
I don't think I ever did doubt myself. I knew I had experience. I knew what to expect, and it would be something strange or out of the ordinary that would get me if I was going to be gotten. I always felt I was coming home, though. As I was counting up the other day in anticipation of this, I think 7 or 8 guys that I had flown with never came back. They were a hole in the ground someplace, and so that kept you real, or you knew that was out there. But I never hesitated to get in the airplane and go another time. Let's do this. It's fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure you probably couldn't do it if you were going to hesitate.
Well, yeah, I knew some guys that were always nervous, always and I appreciated that. I could see the shakes, but I don't think I ever had that. Closest I came to it was at night, landed never seeing the deck.
That's
but
crazy.
My first stupid reaction was, what a great pilot you are, realizing, no, the Lord's been kind to me.
Okay, let's talk about honor flight. How did you get involved in, how did you get on that trip, and tell me what that was like?
Oh, yeah, the honor flight. It was interesting. I hadn't anticipated doing that. I have a granddaughter whose husband, Jake, nice guy, he had arranged for that with his grandfather, who I think was 99 years old.
Wow.
And his grandfather was all excited to do it, and he was going to be, everybody has to have somebody with them. And for me, I can't walk great distances anymore, so, I had to have a wheelchair. But he was good. I'd give him a hard time when we were in the, running around Washington, up a hill. Come on, Jake.
Well, describe honor flight to someone who's never done it. What happens?
Okay, what they do is they invite people who have served in the military. And in our case, it was, well, no, it wasn't just Navy guys. It was Navy, Army, and Marine Corps. And free, they will give you a flight from wherever you are, which for us happened to be Provo, Utah, back to Washington, D.C., load you on buses, take you to all the different sites to see back there in Washington, the Vietnam Wall and that whole thing. And just let you do this with a bunch of guys that were in the military back then. Interestingly, our group of 50, we were too young to have been involved in World War II. We had no World War II vets. I mean, you can imagine that. They're all 100 now at least and dead. We did have some Korean War veterans. I think we had 3 on the flight. And then we had some that were, after Vietnam.
Iraq,
Iran, all that sort of stuff. And of the 50, only 3 had seen combat. And I got to meet, I think, all 3 of them. But that's not atypical. I mean, a lot of people that go into the military, there are so many different support groups that are out there that probably out of 53 being Vietnam veterans of combat isn't unheard of. Though, I brought this piece of paper so I could remember these numbers. Actually, this is a picture of my grandson at the wall looking up a guy whose name is on there that I knew. He was a guy that was in the squadron before the cruise before I joined, and he'd been shot down over Laos and is still to this day listed as missing in action because they have no crash site, they have no body. So who knows if that'll ever turn up. But they gave us this list of stuff for the guys whose names appear on the wall. And this says 52,267. Every once in a while they find somebody, so there's always some late entries, but that's basically it. Think of 58,500 people, names appear on that wall. There are 3 sets of fathers and sons in that group.
Wow.
8,283 were just 19 years old. But of the 18-year-olds, there are 33,103. By far, these kids had just, they were just starting life, and all of them died there. 997 were killed on their first day in country.
Wow.
This guy that I met there on the flight, Martin Skougard, Skougard, he said that he was in a lot of firefights, and he said the last one he was in, they were attacked, and everyone in that group was either killed or wounded, and he was one of the wounded. And he said there were 2 guys that was their first day, and he said, "Stick with me, I'll get you out of this." And they all ended up in the same foxhole, along with a grenade from the VC ended up in there. those two on their first day were killed. And then he had part of his leg blown off, deafened in one ear and partially deaf in the other. And they just had to wait there all night trying to stay alive until the helos could come in and get him out of there.
Wow.
And for him, it was tough. He was telling me he was a member of the church. But after that, you have this survivor's remorse, I guess it is. And he felt badly about those two guys he had promised, stick with me, I'll get you out of this, and wondered why he had made it and they hadn't. Went to drugs and drinking, then finally put his life back together. And on this flight, normal guy, active in the church and all, but paid a price there, as did a lot of these guys. 1,400 of the names on the wall were killed on the day of their scheduled departure, return home. There's 31 sets of brothers on the wall.
Wow.
And 244 were awarded the Medal of Honor. And that's just a quick review of who those guys are. And of course, I never met this guy. His name is Dennis Pike. This is my grandson. And unfortunately for this grandson here, nice guy, he and his brother were at UVU last week when Charlie Kirk was killed. And we got a text from their mom, our daughter Sarah, saying they're having a hard time with that. And, I'm the one that should have seen stuff like that, but I never did. Never saw somebody face-to-face killed. Closest thing was being on the accident investigation board for Greg. But these two guys are just having a hard time with that because that was graphic and ugly. So, yeah, anyhow.
What's your takeaway from everything? For you?
For me, the military experience, I think, was worthwhile. I was honored to serve, proud to serve. I had sort of learned from my dad that maybe that's the way life is. You grow up, go through adolescence, and then before you get married and get on with life, you serve in the military, and then life begins. So he was World War II. I was Vietnam, but with no one ever shooting at me. So I was proud to do my part. And all these guys on the honor flight, as we sat around and talked, all of them feel that same way. Though the 60s was a different time for our country. I was just down the road in Los Angeles from Berkeley, where the free speech, free love, all that stuff started. Yeah. Mario Savio and some others. And even Bill Clinton thinking he was a hero because he dodged the draft. I don't know how you could be commander-in-chief and dodge the draft and feel comfortable in that position where you are the commander-in-chief. That never rang true with me, still doesn't. But then I've seen enough stuff where I should have been dead, and I'm not, being grateful for that, and acknowledging that it wasn't because I was the greatest pilot in the world, but just because I think the Lord looked out for me. And I appreciate that, appreciate the fact that I had the chance of being with our 4 children and watching them grow up, helping him maybe do that, though they will not listen to my stories anymore. They've had enough. But we have 15 grandkids now and 5 or 6 great-grandkids with 2 more on the way.
Wow.
And
that's great.
We're pleased with that, and that they're all good kids. They're all doing well. So maybe giving up on 20 years in the military to be home, most of it's Gail's doing, but I must have done something other than bore them with stories. So, yeah, glad to be alive. Glad I did it. but moved on to other stuff.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, well, thank you for inviting me to do this.
Yeah, great stories. That's such an intense thing, landing on an aircraft carrier.
There were times, but again, that I've gotten used to adrenaline.